Hey everybody, I'm Rosalind, your friendly neighborhood landlord. Don't worry, I won't bite. Hi, I'm Rosalind Resnick, your friendly neighborhood landlord, the place where landlords and tenants can talk about issues, break down barriers, and hopefully find some peace in this crazy world of ours. Welcome to the show. My guest today is my former tenant, Kevin, who used to live in one of my beautiful townhouses in the West Village. And Kevin, thank you for joining me. Because as I was saying earlier, a lot of tenants are actually afraid of their landlords, especially tenants who are renting an apartment for the first time. And the long story short, you and I actually hit it off day one because I'd like to think that both of us are sane, rational people.
Absolutely. No, thanks so much for having me on here. Glad I could be a part of this and had a wonderful experience as your tenant. And I agree. Day one, we made a real connection and it was really beneficial towards the living experience.
Yeah, and Kevin, one of the things I think is so interesting about our experience, my experience with you as a tenant is that typically, I mean, I act as my own rental broker and I also handle my own property management, so I'm not just the owner. But having said that, you actually typically I advertise my apartments on StreetEasy, which is um, I guess kind of the multiple listing service in New York because we don't actually have one. So the long and short is that I didn't even, I mean, I had four guys who were living in the apartment that you and your friends ultimately rented. They were four roommates sharing an apartment, and I wasn't sure whether they were going to renew or not. They were kind of on the fence about it. Long story short, you actually reached out to me before I even had a chance to put that before I even had a chance to list that apartment on StreetEasy. So tell me the story. I think my listeners would love to hear how you managed to find an apartment that was not even listed for rent.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd premise this with the process is, I would say, not for the faint of heart and definitely takes some time, but it's actually how I found each of my apartments in the city, and it's been a very worthwhile endeavor. So anyone who has the appetite for it, happy to walk you through the process. And
Sure.
the general premise is I found, and I hope the brokers don't kill me here, but I found them to not add a ton of value, particularly with the StreetEasy process, where once something comes online to the market, anybody can see it. It's as close to a multiple listing service as we have, and then it becomes a race to close. And the brokers, in exchange for showing the apartment, which you can often do, particularly in the non-large buildings, with direct with the landlord or their property manager, they charge up to 15% of
I
annual rent,
know it's gotten
which
so crazy.
it's
And
so expensive.
this is why, I mean, this is why I guess it was like 8, 9 years ago, long before COVID, I decided like forget brokers because in New York, unfortunately, the tenant has to pay the fee.
Right.
So, so it's what I still believe in brokers in terms of finding a buyer to help you sell a building. But
Yes,
when it comes
absolutely.
to rentals, especially people your age, I mean, you just want to be able to go online, find the listing and then go and check it out yourself. So there's no reason why why somebody like you and your friends should have to pay 15% to some broker who basically just opens the door.
Yes, and that's the view. And when you think about it, when you're living with a group of friends and the apartment rent's getting up, I mean, this could be $10,000+ of a
Easily.
fee. And a lot of times people aren't living in apartments that long in the city when they're early on in their career because jobs might go for 2 years before you switch. People might change cities. So that fee adds a real material portion to your net effective monthly rent if you're only living there for a year or two or three.
Exactly.
So it puts a whole host of apartments that might have been really amazing to live in at a budget for a lot of people. So this is an approach that one of my friends actually who had worked in the real estate industry helped me with. And should I just start going through it?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead. Because I mean,
Yeah.
what I think is so brilliant about what you guys did, or you personally did, was well, I don't want to steal your thunder. Tell me exactly how you found out about my apartment.
Sure, sure. So the first step is trying to identify which apartments might be coming up for lease when you're looking for an apartment.
Okay.
So you can go to StreetEasy, that New York multiple listing service that we had talked about, and you can search explicitly for apartments that are unavailable for rent or have been rented or something along those lines. And you can, with that, draw a radius around the area you want to live, set apartments for unavailable for rent, and then you can sort by date. And you can see apartments that are coming up on your cycle. So say you moved into the city in June, typically you're renewing on a June cycle. You can see apartments that were taken off the market June a year ago, June 2 years ago, June 3 years ago.
Right.
And those are going to be your high priority targets within the area you're looking. So you'll identify a list of apartments. Yep.
Right. So Kevin, so basically you were cold calling landlords.
Yes. Well, I was going to tell you how I figured out who they were next.
Okay.
This
Yeah,
is
go
this
ahead.
is
Go
the
ahead.
glorious part. Yeah. So basically, it's cold calling landlords, identifying the apartment that you'd want to look at, and rather than looking at every building in New York, you want to try to limit the list to what's more likely to be feasible. Then every building in New York is organized by block and lot, and the mortgage documents for each of the buildings are also publicly available information. It's through a database called ACRIS, and
Okay.
it's ACRIS, and you can just go to Google, search ACRIS New York, and what you'll want to do is you'll want to enter that address. Uh, you'll go to ACRIS, find addresses, you'll enter the street name and the apartment number. That'll spit out a block and lot. Then you'll go back to the main ACRIS database. You go search property records, look at parcel identifier by block and lot. You'll enter that block and lot, and it'll take you to the list of all of the like publicly available documents for that building. And the mortgage document has to be signed by the owner typically. And sometimes it'll be the owner in name, sometimes it'll be an LLC. And once you have the owner name, it's a process of, frankly, going to Google and trying to figure out an email address, a phone number, a contact for that person. And sometimes you'll get lucky and it's a building management company that has a few buildings you can go to. Other times it's an individual that has a few buildings, or other times it's just someone renting out their condo and you go to them directly and effectively take your list of 10, 20, 30, 40 apartments you identified, try to get contact info for each of them, shoot them an email. And I'd say the response rate is probably about 20%. So sometimes people don't respond to you. I'd say half the responses are, how do you possibly get my contact info? This is a little creepy.
Okay.
And then the other half appreciate the hustle, and you premise it with a nice email of, hey, like just trying to get ahead of the market. Know things are quite crazy in New York when it comes to rentals, and was trying to be proactive here. Thought you had a really great place, like would love to talk with you about renting it. And that's ultimately how I found your place, Rosa, with the townhouse in West Village, which was an unbelievable apartment that we really love living there. And it was a 4 bedroom. So as we were talking about, one where the broker fee would have been quite high, and took this approach of reaching out to you directly, and
Great.
were
And Kevin, if
fortunately
you
able to get in
remember
touch.
this. No, and just, like, I as a landlord very much appreciated your hustle because I was looking at a situation. I don't know if I'm sure you remember this, but there were already 4 guys who were living in that apartment because
Yeah.
even before COVID, I was attracting a lot of shares, like the Princeton guys who wanted to live together, the Dartmouth guys. So, so that was already becoming a trend even before COVID. And then
Hmm.
during COVID, practically all of the families with kids who'd been living in my buildings moved out. And then that became the trend. And like right now, of all of my buildings and my apartments, I have like 13 apartments now in my 6 townhouses. All but one is either a group of guys, young couples, single guys. There's only one family with kids. So
Hmm.
long story short, I was thrilled to get your call because not only did you seem like a great group of guys, but the current group of guys, the group of guys who were living there already, there was one of them who wanted to stay. If you remember that, there was one
Yep.
of them who wanted to stay, but the other three, were going to leave because I think 2 of them had found girlfriends, and long
Yeah.
story short,
Yeah.
they were going to scatter to the winds. And the
Right.
problem, ordinarily, I would have, tried everything to renew the lease with the current group of guys. But unfortunately, this was a situation where only one guy wanted to stay, and he was scrambling to find three other guys to move in with him. And it just wasn't working out. I mean, I
Mhm.
remember there were a couple of guys like they weren't sure, they wanted to move in different times. But long story short, I needed to find four guys who were willing to put their names on the lease. So one of
Yeah.
the things that impressed me about you was that, you weren't coming in like, empty handed. You were coming in with three other roommates who were willing to sign up right here, right now.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, that was the goal to come in with something pre-baked so we'd be ready to go. And the other thing we were excited about was finding a place we could stay long term as well, which you were really
Right.
amenable to, which we appreciated. So we were looking for a 3-year option there, and we had a great time with that. And I'd say the other benefit related to this that I actually ended up knowing one of the guys who was living there actually ended up being a friend of a friend.
Oh,
Uh,
that's right. That's right.
yeah, and I actually explored living with him because I love the place so much. Uh,
Right.
before I brought in my three other buddies there, but related to that kind of friend to friend concept, these groups of people living together, different than what the family dynamic is. I think the other benefit to something like this with the landlord is
Right.
uh, when it's time for us to move forward to the next phase, which ended up being three of us moving in with our girlfriends. We know guys who are younger in similar situations to pass down the apartment to. So I think you ended up not putting it on the market again because we were able to introduce you to another group of guys
I know. I mean,
who.
that's what's been like so amazing about that apartment because I'm just trying to think. It was 2020 when I signed a lease with a family, and their
Mhm.
kids actually went to school right across the street from my
Oh, that's awesome.
building, but they moved in March 1, and then the city
Mhm.
shut down the schools March 16th. We're talking
Yeah,
2020, and
right.
then like, a month later, they pulled up stakes and they moved to Florida.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it was pretty crazy. But the
yeah. You
long
got some
story,
merch.
yeah, so I was able to get a group of four guys, and yeah, that apartment. I'm just trying to think here. No, so thanks to like you guys staying for 2 years, and then the other group of guys who are living there now, who just renewed their lease as well. My
Amazing,
apartment, that apartment where you guys used to live, has not been on the market for the last 4 years.
amazing.
And
I think
and
that's a win-win for everybody. At least
yeah,
amount of friction for dealing with people moving in and out. You've got no dead time with months where it's unrented, and then we love the brokers for helping find a buyer and such, but it keeps the fees lower and makes the apartment more accessible, where the fund flows stay between the renters and the owner.
right, and this is what I'm saying. It's like to me, I mean, I have a lot of friends who are brokers who are probably gonna hate me for saying this, but
Yeah,
my
yeah,
thing is like when you can cut out the middleman, right?
yeah.
It's like, I collect rate like you guys pay less. I make more, and up that broker, well, I guess maybe he could sell a building and get a commission.
Right,
But the long
right.
story short is on the rental side, I'm a big believer in dealing directly with my tenants. Like I
Yeah.
see it's very rare. Like over the last 8 years, occasionally like brokers will come to me who are already representing a tenant who's looking for an apartment. And in
Hmm.
that case, like, obviously I'm the landlord, I'm not collecting a commission, but if the tenant has already decided that he or she is willing to pay a broker, that's fine. But for
Yeah.
guys like you, I mean, obviously you're doing well in banking, private equity, et cetera. Having said that, I know that guys like you are you're not looking at the total rent of the apartment. You're looking at how much does each guy have to pay on a per room basis.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
So when you add in that broker fee, on a, I'm trying to remember, I don't want to, tell the whole internet here how much you were paying, but the long story short is that,
Oh,
guys,
they
guys,
want the brokers would want to charge 15% of a year's rent, which is
yeah.
a lot.
So that could have easily added several $100s a month to the cost of each guy's room in that apartment.
Totally.
So now let me ask you this. So I know that I know that after you guys left my apartment in the West Village to go
Hmm.
your own separate ways, I know that you managed to find an apartment. Obviously, you're living in a beautiful place now. It's not roommates anymore. It's just, your apartment because you've moved up in the world. But how did you end up finding your new apartment? Was that through a broker or did you go
No,
direct?
I use the same approach,
You
and
did.
that's how I found my previous apartment as well.
Oh, wow. Okay. So
Yeah.
it seems to me like you could teach the course at this point.
Exactly. Look, it takes a lot of time, is what I'll say, but I think it's been very fruitful. And one of the things that I like personally as well, and I'll make a little bit of a pitch for why I think this strategy ends up being worthwhile, is
Okay.
I happen to like to host, and you effectively through cutting out the broker like that get access to a higher tier of apartments than you would have otherwise because it's for the same price you're just dedicating it towards rent versus a broker fee.
Exactly.
And with a better apartment, uh, whether it's a more central area or elevated living situation, people are more inclined to want to come over and spend time with you at your place versus wherever else they may find themselves living. So it's great for hosting. And then on a you want to go this way and kind of justify it cost wise even more, which is the pitch I was giving to my buddies to come live with me in the townhouse, is your actual living cost when you're hosting and having people over as opposed to constantly paying for Ubers to go to other people's apartments is
Right.
lower on a monthly basis when people are coming to you.
That's
So
something I hadn't even thought of, but that makes so much sense.
yeah, a lot of people look at just rent as the function of the like monthly living cost, but I do think it's important to actually factor in things like where you are as an indicator of where people are going to come to you. Or you end up Ubering a lot because Ubers add up really quickly to could easily be a few $100 a month,
Exactly.
and like even things like do you have laundry in your apartment building, and a lot of
Right.
apartments in New York don't even have laundry. So if you're going to be paying for a service monthly, that's another $100+ a month that you could theoretically dedicate towards rent and such. So I kind of try to factor in the all-in living equation, skew towards having a nicer apartment because I like to host, and try to make it as cost effective as possible through putting it in an area that people will come to, trying to cut out the broker through the strategy I outlined, and being thoughtful with things like laundry and so forth. But through that, I felt very fortunate about where I've gotten to live in the city. Uh, Both the townhouse and my prior apartment and the current one have people over a bunch. And when you take care of the apartment like that, you can keep doing it.
Now, Kevin, let me ask you before we close here, and this is what I've been asking all of my guests, like, are there three tips, right? Three tips that you'd like to offer to help our listeners execute your strategy and cut out the middleman, save on fees, save on Ubers? What would be the three things that you would recommend?
Well, as a first premise, when it comes to renting your apartment, I would, just to double down on what I said, actually think about total cost of living because
Okay.
it's more than just the monthly rent. And that also includes the broker fee. So that's one. Then second, I mean, in terms of execution, it's going through the strategy I outlined before, and there's just a certain level of work. You should definitely have a detailed Excel spreadsheet to keep it organized because a lot of outreach, a lot of identification, and you want to
Okay.
be systematic about it. Otherwise, you'll just lose track of who you reached out to and who you haven't. And then the last I'd encourage to be thoughtful in your outreach, pleasantly persistent, and always be very polite. And these are personal relationships with people ideally you got to know, like Rosalind, you and I have gotten to know each other,
Hmm.
and treat somebody who you're interacting with in this process as a friend, as a business partner, someone who you're cordial to, and uh, reach out with that in mind. And I think things will go a long way. So I think those are the kind of like the three things off the top of my head that I would think of there.
Okay, well, I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and advice with our listeners because, to be honest, like for me as a landlord, my strategy is to get tenants to recommend their friends and
Yeah.
therefore never to have to advertise an apartment at all.
Yeah,
So thank you
absolutely.
very much. This has clearly been a win for both of us.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for having me on.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon.